Good evening, everybody. Good to see you all again. Welcome back. We're about 2/3 done. This is going fast. And we've probably already covered most of the mystical truth and most of the metaphysical truth that we're going to talk about in this class, but now there's questions of attainment and use and things like that of it. We'll check that in a minute. For 5,000 years, it was 5,000 years ago that the basic mystical truth of Advaita Vedanta, which is the truth that all there is consciousness, was revealed to mankind and taught. And this truth has been confirmed by every mystic that has everyone who's ever had the mystical experience since that date, or for the last 5,000 years. And if all there is consciousness, then there's very little question about omnipresence, because everything and everywhere is within consciousness. So clearly consciousness, that being all there is everywhere, so omnipresence is a given. And omniscience is pretty clear, because once again, since everything is within consciousness, and since what is known means what we're conscious of, omniscience falls out. In fact, omniscience and omnipresence are identical when we realize that all there is God, or all there is consciousness. And omnipotence doesn't really mean much of anything, since there's only one thing. There's nothing to use a power over. So all there is really not so much omnipotence, not so much the one power, as all there is consciousness expressed. And those of us who have had the mystical experience tell us that the experience is one of eternal harmony, peace, perfection. And yet we look around the world and we notice that out of the 6.3 billion people, roughly 6.3 billion of them are not having this experience, are not seeing peace and harmony in their life, are not having the experience of any God in their life. There's 6 million people who believe that God is in their life, but their lives don't demonstrate that fact. And on the other hand, there are lots of examples of the demonstration of the presence of God, the power of God in this human world. Jesus demonstrated it at length. Buddha demonstrated it at length. Many of the enlightened masters have demonstrated the consciousness and the healing powers and various things like that come with the spiritual consciousness. And the realization that Joel finally made absolutely clear, although it was not a secret before then, the realization that he made clear is that it's not that God is effective wherever God is, because God is omnipresent. It's that God is effective wherever God is realized. And that makes such clear, simple, almost trivial sense when you think about it. It's saying that I experience God when God is in my consciousness, or I'm conscious of God when God is in my consciousness. That's a tautology. You know, when I'm conscious of God, God is in my consciousness. And And yet that's the basic fact that most Orthodox religion and most of humanity doesn't seem to be aware of. It's not knowing the truth. It's not the truth that sets us free. It's knowing the truth. It's being conscious of the truth that sets us free. When God is in my consciousness, then that is what mind is out picturing as my experience. And so when I realize God, I have God in my experience. And if you sitting next to me are not conscious of the presence of God, then mind is not expressing God in your experience, because it's not in your consciousness. And it's just as tight as it can be. If it's not in my consciousness, I'm not conscious of it. If it is in my consciousness, I'm conscious of it. But this has been really obscured. It's veiled, really, by the self-serving religions that need to have a priest class and need to have money and need to have all these sorts of things to allow them to continue as an established organization rather than teachers of truth. And so they don't present the simple truths to us that allow us to have our own direct experience of God. But in any event, the point is for tonight that if God is not in our experience, unless we have attained the consciousness of God, then how do we attain the consciousness of God? That's the practical question. We're starting to get practical in this work. We talked about the three levels of human consciousness: the material consciousness, the mental consciousness, and the spiritual consciousness. And I also mentioned last week the three levels of personal sense that I am aware of. The word I am is the loaded one, that I am aware of. There is the self, capital S self, which is the all there is consciousness self, which is what people call God or pure awareness or consciousness. And there is myself, capital S, which is what Joel means when he says God is, or what is, but what is expressed as individual consciousness. So the individual expression of the self that I am experiencing is what I call myself, capital S. And these are both in spirit. These are both expressions of God. One is God and one is an expression of God, and this is all in spirit and this is all in spiritual consciousness. And then there is the third sense that I have, which I call myself little s, and I talk about myself. And this is my human personal sense of myself as this separate entity with a body and with a mind and apart and separate from God and doing my own thing and autonomous and all this sort of thing. Now, myself small s is the human sense. And the human sense is the one that is related to both the material and the mental levels of consciousness. These are both very human levels of consciousness. There's no spirituality at all in knowing metaphysical truth as far as knowing mental truth. And there's no spirituality at all in exercising mental truth. Voodoo is not spiritual. Hexing is not spiritual. Affirmations are not spiritual. Something there. The myself, small s, is this personal sense. It's this body that's growing older. There was an infant and became a boy and then a man and is growing older, and this mind that has changed its content many, many times, and this personality that is associated with me, and all these things are myself small s. Myself capital S is the expression of God, and Joel uses the word impersonal expression of God. The expression of God as impersonal individual consciousness. And we need to see what that is. If I can look at this particular lifetime in the Leelaa, the human consciousness is entirely in Leelaa, in the Maya, in the mind. And if I look at this lifetime, the one thing that's constant about me is this sense of I am, this thing I call I am, if I don't make the mistake of associating it with my body and my mind. I have always had this sense of I am, this sense of awareness. And that, if I look at it clearly, has been constant. The I am that I recall when I was 5 or 6 and fell out of a tree and got the wind knocked out of myself is no different from the I am that I'm experiencing right now. Now the thoughts, the body, all of that is different. The personal sense is different, but that I am is a constant. And if I could go back and experience the I am that was me, that was constantly me through my previous life, it would be exactly the same I am. It is that I am, which is the myself, which is the expression of God consciousness, which is impersonal, in that, for all we know, last time I was an African female instead of a Hermosa Beach male this time. So the I am, the individual expression of God is individual, but it also is not personal. It's absolutely impersonal. It is without sex. It is without color. It is without religion. It is without anything. It is just this personal expression, this individual expression of God, which then comes into the Leelaa and performs this silly game that we play of taking on lifetime after lifetime and body after body and trying everything that isn't God that doesn't work until we find out what God is, and going through this dance from ignorance to enlightenment and all this stuff, which is all Leelaa, which is all really nonsense. The point is that spiritual consciousness is aware of myself, capital S, and itself, i.e. the self. And human consciousness, myself, little s, is aware of mind and personality and body and desires and all these things that are in this Leelaa, in this play right now. And that's what has to go in order to attain the spiritual consciousness. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says that out of 1,000 people, one seeks. And out of 1,000 seekers, one attains. Which means roughly that 1 in a million attains the spiritual consciousness. The good news for us is that the first 1,000 are already beside the wayside. We are the seekers. So we are already all of us the 1 out of 1,000. So there's 30,000 out there who aren't here. But what the Bhagavad Gita is saying is that of 1,000 like us, 1 will attain, which is not very encouraging odds. And there's another 1,000 that it doesn't talk about. Out of 1,000 who attain, this is my own addition, but out of 1,000 who attain, 1 is struck enlightened without doing any work. The rest of us have to do it the hard way. We have to slog, we have to trudge, we have to develop we have to play the game in Leelaa of growing our consciousness from experience to experience and lifetime to lifetime. So it's like 1 in a billion are struck enlightened. It's a very rare thing, not something to count on. If you have any any attempt at attaining, the game is to get to work. So the question is, what makes it so difficult? Why is it so hard that only 1 out of 1,000 attains? Well, there are lots of obstacles that prevent us from attaining. Joel mentioned, I think I pointed out in the first class, Joel mentions the 3 obstacles. One obstacle is the belief in 2 powers, the belief that there is a power other than God. Let's see, before I go here, let's back up 1 minute and go back and look at the emptying out stuff that we talked about in the first class. One of the real barriers to attaining God consciousness is any and every concept that we have about God. If we have the concept that God is anything, we have blocked ourselves right out of spiritual consciousness, because consciousness is not things. Consciousness is incorporeal. Consciousness is not material, and things are material. So if we have any idea that God is a thing or a person or up there somewhere, we've blocked ourselves. And if we have any of the conditioned concepts that God can grant or withhold, that God can fulfill or withdraw, that God can give us anything or withhold anything from us, if we have any concept about some being that is making decisions about whether we have sufficiently invoked it so that it will grant our wish or something like that, then we've separated ourselves from God. If we follow the conditioning that most people have of asking God for anything, we've blocked ourselves from spiritual consciousness, because what is consciousness. What is doesn't have any things. What is doesn't have any matter. What is doesn't know what matter is. Matter is all in the Leelaa. That's all in our human consciousness. So if we go to God for something, we're blocked. We can't get anything because God doesn't have anything. What is has already expressed itself as us, and that expression is full and complete, and we already have everything. We are, not even have, we already are everything that what is. So the whole question of attaining is a block. So we can't get to God if we're trying to attain. Or obtain. So Joel's statement that one of the barriers is the idea that there's the belief in 2 powers, the belief in good and evil, is a barrier. It is for that reason. There is just the one consciousness, which is eternal and unchanging, and therefore there can't be good and evil, and good becoming evil, and evil becoming good. These are all human concepts. These are all limited concepts. These are all small, finite concepts. And in fact, the definition of good and evil change from day to day, and group to group, and religion to religion, and country to country. And so that's again a barrier from realizing consciousness, the idea that there's good and evil. The idea that we can become more spiritual by being good is a barrier. Being good or being bad, both those words in quotes, is absolutely irrelevant to attaining spiritual consciousness. There is no good and there is no bad. There is just what is, the eternal peace, the eternal perfection, the eternal absence of disharmony. So being a do-gooder is an absolute will absolutely prevent us from finding God, from realizing, as will thinking we can do evil. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't do anything. It may well be that as our life unfolds, we apparently do a lot of good, but that will not be us doing good for the sake of being good. That will be us having a clear realization of the presence of God in our life, and it will be God expressing itself as us, and that expression is good, in quotes again. So, but the point is that it will not be us doing good. It will be God expressing itself through us. Another obstacle is judging. Another one of Joel's obstacles is judging. Judging is an obstacle because what you're judging is an appearance in the Leelaa. You're judging something that's in the Leelaa. And regardless of how you judge it, it's like judging the water in a mirage and trying to figure out whether the water in the mirage is wet or dry, or is hot or cold. Judging is judging the concept that we have that mind is forming in the Leelaa, and the concept is not the reality. So a good picture is the same as a bad picture. A healthy picture is the same as an unhealthy picture as far as thinking that it has existence on its own. If we, instead of judging this one to be healthy and that one to be sick, recognize that what we are looking at is the eternal, impersonal, perfect expression of God, and that we're not seeing that, but that we're seeing a concept of that which appears to be healthy or unhealthy, then we're in a much closer alignment with truth, and this is not judgment, because the judgment is that the individual that we would call healthy or unhealthy is in fact an expression of God in its perfection eternally. You see how far away from what we're used to thinking spiritual consciousness is? It's a long step. The third one that Joel points out is self-preservation, the idea that we have to take care of ourselves and preserve ourselves. And again, that's the idea of taking care of the self I'm trying to preserve is this false sense of self, this myself, small s, that I think I have to preserve against yourself and his self and herself, small s's, and all of these are, again, the small finite concepts of the impersonal individual expressions that we really are, that are one with what is. Funny, things don't get grabbed in my head anymore. They just go charging through, and they either get said or they're gone. There was something there. It'll come back again later, or not. Let's see. Other things we need to let go of. Well, it's not one of Joel's, but the traditional one of all the long-time teachings is desire. The desire for anything is a obstacle. You may recall that was one of the things that Patanjali put on his lists of cause of suffering: attraction or aversion, desire or fear would be the things that we might say. Because if we want something, we're looking at the material world in Leelaa. we're locking ourselves into being human. The minute we have a desire for something, we're talking about something, so we're in the material world, we're in human consciousness, and the I that wants it is someone who's in the material world, who's in the human consciousness, who's lacking something. And this again is in the false picture. So having a desire, desiring something is a block, a prevention, a barrier. In fact, Barbara Moll's 4 lists, she said, make lists of everything you love, everything you hate, everything you fear, and everything you desire. And these 4 lists now are the lists of things that are tying you to your human consciousness. Are we beginning to see why this is a 1 in 1,000 type thing? Why it's a daunting process? Let me remind you that when I'm talking this way, I'm talking a bit absolute. I'm talking about full attainment of the spiritual consciousness as distinct from making progress on the spiritual path. So we don't need to do all of these things completely. We don't have to get those lists completely empty before we see any progress in our lives. But that brings up another point. As our consciousness grows, as our awareness of truth grows, as we begin to experience this truth and it becomes part of our beliefs, good old moron mind reflects it. So our life gets better. As we know more about the presence of what is as the reality of everything, and as we know more about the fact that human consciousness doesn't have any power and doesn't have any ability to manifest, then our belief changes more towards things that are godlike, and our life gets better. And perhaps our lack begins to get fulfilled, or perhaps our sickness begins to get well, or perhaps our loneliness begins to get companionized, or perhaps these things start happening. And when these things start happening, we get distracted and we go away from the spiritual path. Dulcie has this book that I was looking at today, and I just read just one page. Not even a page. I read 4 sentences, and the guy is just wonderful. And he said, essentially that all of you who are here seeking, it's inevitable that you will attain. End of paragraph. Next paragraph. Or not. Never underestimate the power of Maya. We will get sucked in to Maya. We will get sucked into doing good. We will get sucked into taking care of our parents. We will get sucked into taking care of our children. We will get sucked into taking care of the starving kids in Ethiopia. We will get sucked into, getting rid of Saddam Hussein. We will get sucked into kicking out the Republicans. We will get sucked into kicking out the Democrats. We will get sucked in and sucked in and sucked in and sucked in by all of this noise in human consciousness, whose whole purpose is to suck us in. And every time we get distracted, we're away from the spiritual path, and we're becoming one of the 999 instead of one of the one. So it's very easy to get sidetracked when our life gets comfortable. Almost nobody starts on the spiritual path because their life is perfect, and they want to know why that is. That's not a really big driving force in human consciousness, It's a good one, but it's not the basic one. The people who come in with a thirst have a great deal of grace in their life. Let's just leave it there. Some people do come in with thirst, and they have a lot of grace. So in any event, there's lots and lots and lots of barriers, distractions, obstacles to gaining enlightenment, attaining this consciousness of God. Uh, the problem with getting partway there is that, so we attain some understanding and it starts out picturing in our life, but it's still just a mental out picturing. It's still just a mental power, and there are always bigger mental powers than us, and there's always the lack of diligence in maintaining that belief that can cause, and if we stop paying attention to this and just let our thinking drop entirely, then we will start hearing human consciousness and we will get sucked back into the beliefs in good and evil and the powers of all this and that, and it will disappear. The human life becomes one of suffering, because good things turn bad and bad things turn good, and healthy bodies turn sick and sick bodies turn health, and it just turns over and turns over and turns over when we're living in the world of duality, the world of two powers. This is Buddha's basic truth in everyone's sense. So, how do we attain spiritual consciousness? How do we arrive at that? Joel's basic way of the fundamental tool is meditation, according to the Infinite Way, and according to lots and lots of other practices as well. The fundamental tool is meditation. Joel has a very specific step-by-step formula, and I'm not going to belabor it here because it's on practically every one of the 350 tapes. But the pattern really is, he suggests that we learn the letter of truth. We learn some truth. In his case, it's learning scriptural quotations. He talks about learning lots of scriptural quotations so you can bring them to mind easily. But for us, Scripture isn't necessarily an authority, so we have to find other authorities. But whatever we consider to be authorities of truth, or whatever things that we think we're trying to find out whether or not they are truth, whatever we want to play with, what we can do is take these truths into our consciousness and contemplate them. And he says to contemplate it and just think about it and think what it means and let it play in your mind, and your mind will begin to generate more concepts about this truth that you're working with, and slowly, especially to the extent that you have any sort of a window open to yourself, capital S, more truth will come and it will grow. And after a, 3-minute or 5-minute or however long contemplation, you will have a realization or an acceptance or a deepening of that truth. It'll drop a level and you'll say, yeah, oh. And then there's a window right there in which you're quiet. We're quiet just for that second or 2 seconds or 5 seconds, but there's a period of quiet. And that's the fundamental beginning towards making contact, towards having a conscious realization of God. Trying to open by using the letter of truth, trying to open a little pipe to yourself, capital S, and get some more truth and get a better sense of truth until you get into a place just for this moment of peace. And in that peace, you listen. We listen for what many have called the still small voice. And that listening is the state of prayer, what Joel calls prayer. There's a vocabulary thing here. The word meditation is commonly used both for the practice and for the state of consciousness it leads to. So there's a confusion there. Sometimes people say I'm going to meditate, and what they mean is I'm going to practice meditation. And other people say I'm meditating, or I meditated, and they're talking about having the state of silence. Joel uses the term contemplative meditation to talk about contemplation, and then he uses the word prayer to talk about that moment of silence, that moment of listening. Or we can talk about contemplation as the contemplation and meditation as that moment of silence in which we're listening. I know it's a tradition now in the 12-step halls to talk about prayer is when I'm talking to God and meditation is when I'm listening. But hopefully we've heard enough in this class to understand that there's nothing to talk to God about. And so the idea of prayer as talking to God, presumably informing God of what it is we need or lack or think He should be doing, that is wasted energy. So Joel uses the word prayer for sitting in the silence. I use the word meditation for sitting in the silence. My sponsor prays and I meditate, and we both do exactly the same thing. It was great fun when we discovered that. But the game is to get silent and listening, whether you call it meditation or prayer, listening for the still small voice. And every time you do that, every time you get silent, even for a second or two, and listen, you are you're increasing your ability to hear. To hear the still small voice. And this process, slowly, will lead towards the experience of the presence of God, the experience of the silence. I was listening to a Joel tape the other morning, and he says, lots of times when we get quiet and listen, we don't hear anything. He says, that's often because nothing needs to be said. So the fact that you don't hear the still small voice might not indicate a serious spiritual deficiency on your part. It might mean that everything's fine and nothing needs to be said. But the point is that the attitude in what I call meditation, or what Joel calls prayer, the attitude in that is one of listening, of trying, of being available, of being accepting to hear whatever myself wants to impart to me. See, my self's interest in the Leelaa is to raise my level of consciousness in this journey from ignorance to transcendental consciousness. My self's interest is in raising my level of consciousness. It is myself, capital S, that has brought me to this class. It is yourselves, that have, capital S, that have brought you here. This is the reason we're led to places like this, is our self, capital S, bringing us to where we will get the next piece of information we need on our spiritual path. So what we're really doing is listening to our real self, or trying to hear our real self, or trying to drop this personal sense of self, which is the lie, which is the Leelaa, which is the mask, the costume that we're wearing. So this is the reason for the practice of sitting in the silence, the justification for sitting in the silence. And it's the initial practice towards developing spiritual consciousness. Joel suggests, and it's clearly true, that it's far better to hold 20 30-second meditations a day in which you stop and remember that there is a presence of what is in my life, and try to listen for it 20 times for 30 seconds, which is a total of 10 minutes during the day. That's far more effective than meditating for an hour in the morning, because 59 minutes of that hour will be wasted with your mind chattering. So his practice is to do a contemplation until the mind grows silent, and then listen for as long as the mind is silent, and then get up and go on about your business. And repeat this exercise as often as you can repeat it. Develop tricks like every time you walk out the door, remember the presence, or reach for the presence of God, so that the presence of God will be your experience as you go out into the world, rather than the presence of human consciousness will be your experience. Whenever the phone rings, perhaps you could stop just a second before you pick up the phone, so that you will discover that God's on the phone instead of human consciousness. When you get in your car, you might pause just for a second and remember and reach for the presence of God, and remember that God's driving all the cars that are going to be on the freeway with you, rather than getting out there and driving it with a bunch of humans who are drunk and not paying attention and on their cell phones and doing their thing. It flows much better on the freeway if God's driving all the vehicles. Which it is if you realize it. Which it isn't if you don't realize it. What we're talking about is what Joel talks about at length in his book, Practicing the Presence. And the vocabulary is different in that book, but the book is about practicing the presence of God, practicing remembering to reach for the presence of God, practicing remembering to listen for God, practicing remembering to look for God. Practicing the presence is what that's about. And that's one proven path Joel certainly attained, and so did lots of Joel's students attain. So that path works. Robert always talked about self-inquiry as the direct path, and this meditation has been very effective for me, but so is self-inquiry. Self-inquiry is going right to the root of the problem. Whenever, let's suppose you're trying to be silent and you can't be silent because your mind's thinking, you ask, who's thinking? And the mind will say, your mind, my mind will say, I'm thinking. And you say, well, who is this I? And listen. Don't answer that question, just listen. Who is this I? And if you're upset by somebody on the freeway, instead of getting irate at the person on the freeway, you ask, who's getting upset? And usually the answer will be, I am. And you say, well, who is this I? Who is the I? Where did this I come from? Who is this I? Constantly asking whenever you have any experience, and you can use it for any experience, good or bad, who's feeling elated, or who's feeling upset, or who's afraid, or, who's thinking. But you can constantly inquire as to who it is that's feeling this, because you see, it's your idea that there is a human self that is the cause of all of these things. If I think I'm afraid, the I that thinks it's afraid is this illusory personal sense of self separate from God. And that self truly doesn't exist. That self truly is just a concept in mind. And so Robert suggests continually going back and asking, who does this come to, or to whom does this come, or who's thinking this, or who's feeling this, or who's afraid of this, and continually confronting what is the ego center that's the source of the problem here. And then he says, abide in the I, and what he means is just keep looking for this I, this sense of I. And my experience is that if I say, who's thinking? To who do these thoughts come? These thoughts come to me. I think them. Well, who is this I? And then if I just keep saying I, and looking for it, I, it fades into nothing. It disappears into nothing. It disappears into the nothing it is, because this small I is just a thought in my mind. There's no other reality to it than that. It's just the thought that there is an I. Who would you be? We did a talk on that once a couple of years ago. Who would you be if you never used the word I or your name? Who would you be if you could never say I, or if you could never say your name? Who would you be if you weren't this thought I? If you didn't think I, who would you be? An interesting question to play with. In any event, that's Robert's method of self-inquiry. I did that for a considerable period of time, and my experience was that after I had done that for quite a while, then if I just said who or to whom, if I only went that far, the silence was there immediately. Because the being, I never answered the question, I never found an answer to it, I never answered the question, but the being knew that the real I was nothing. And so if I just said who, I was immediately dropped into the silence. And it became a very useful device for getting into the silence. This idea of a personal self, the idea that I'm the body, the idea that I'm the mind, is one of the obstacles. That's one of the things that has to go, this association. I mean, there appears to be a body here and there appears to be a mind here, and that will continue to appear to be, regardless of whether you're in human consciousness or spiritual consciousness, that will continue to appear to be. The problem is that I've associated myself with it. I think I'm this body and this mind. Just like when we were talking about dreams, the problem in the dream is not that there's a Lee in the dream that's dying. That's not the problem. The problem is that I've associated myself with the Lee and I think it's me that's dying. You know, if I had not associated myself with that body, mind in the dream, but was up there being who I really am, the awareness that contained the dream, then that would just be sort of an interesting little story in the Leelaa. Similarly here, the problem is that I'm associating myself with the body and the mind. I'm associating myself with the I thought, rather than identifying with the I that I was talking about earlier, this awareness that has been constant as far back as I can remember. And every minute that I can actually think about being aware, having any self-awareness, that I was constant. And if I can associate with that, if I withdraw to that, then I'm in spiritual consciousness. And if I think I'm this body-mind, then I'm in human consciousness and I'm playing the rat race. The other things that help us grow in spiritual consciousness or attain spiritual consciousness, certainly the one that was most beneficial with me was sitting in Robert's presence 3 times a week for 7 years. When you are in with a consciousness in the Leelaa, a consciousness that appears in our concept of it to be higher than yours, you will get lifted up. So going where the consciousness is higher is a good practice towards attaining higher consciousness yourself. if teachers come to town, or if whatever happens, hanging out with the higher consciousness is regardless of what they say, is a lifting experience. And being in a community of people who are doing the same sort of work that we're doing is a step out of human consciousness and into the higher consciousness, and that will definitely have an effect. Barbara Mull introduced a really interesting technique called the awareness exercise. And Dulcie, would you feel like leading an awareness exercise? Let's do that last. We'll end with an awareness exercise, because it's a shortcut that Barbara found to experience the silence. And Dulcie's an old pro at that. Let's finish up anything that we need to do that requires words, and then we'll play. It has been amazing to me this year. I was one of the ones who was graced with the thirst. I got sober and read my first Joel book and discovered a thirst, and that thirst has never left me. So I've had this great thirst for spiritual truth for 28 years now. And in that process, I've been with a lot of masters and done a lot of work and done a lot of reading and listened to a lot of Joel and all sorts of things and yada, yada, yada. And this year, all my website development work went away, and so I had much more time on my hands. And what I found myself doing was back to Joel, listening to a lot more Joel. And I've spent the last 9 months listening to 2 or 3 hours of Joel a day and an hour of Robert a day, and reading out of a Joel book, and maybe reading a book a little out of Nisargadatta, and doing stuff like that, So I've been doing a great deal more work than I was in the habit of doing, and I thought I was doing a lot. And it was just amazing to me how all of my understanding dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper as I immersed myself more and more in the process. And the result of that to this point, and it's not nearly done, is that I have really begun to appreciate the power of total immersion in this stuff. The more time we can spend, the faster it goes, the better chance we have. And the other thing that has come of this is the more I become aware of the incredible extent of the conditioning that we have that's contrary to spiritual understanding. It's just, I'm seeing so clearly now how incredibly conditioned we are by everything around us, especially television and advertising and movies and all this stuff, the faster and faster and faster pace of life today, and the fact that everything's been turned way up. Advertisements are much louder, and situation comedies are much stupider and much more violent, and stand-up comedy is much cruder and much more abrasive and much more attacking, and drugs are much stronger, and everything, society is getting jaded. And so everything is being turned up and turned up and turned up and turned up, and so the conditioning mechanism is increasing at an impressive rate, which makes the work apparently that much harder. And it's just so clear to me how hard it is to even give up one idea. think about Joel's first obstacle is believing in two powers is an obstacle. And that means that we don't get to believe that germs have power, and we don't get to believe that depression has power, and we don't get to believe that bullets have power, and we don't get to believe that tidal waves have power, and we don't get to believe that lightning has power, and we don't get to believe that hydrogen bombs have power, and we don't, you see the extent to which we're absolutely conditioned to believe in all these powers. And Joel has, with the exception of the hydrogen bomb, I guess, demonstrated that the others are not power. I mean, metaphysical healing has demonstrated that, and Joel has demonstrated that hurricanes don't have power. While Joel was in Hawaii, no hurricane ever hit Hawaii. Joel has demonstrated that tidal waves don't have power. I mean, they disappear. So Joel demonstrated this time and time again, but we're hearing that right now and doubting whether that's true, or maybe Lee's just misled, or maybe Lee got sucked in, and believed it, because certainly nobody can stop a tidal wave, and yet that happened. And if you can check the weather reports and see that no hurricane struck Hawaii while Joel was there ever, which is an interesting statistic, since he left and they get wiped out immediately, So the point is that the deeper we immerse ourselves, the better chance we have of being the one rather than the 999. And let me just mention secrecy. Maybe it'll come up again next week, but an important spiritual principle is the principle of secrecy. And Joel again stresses this so much as the most important spiritual principle. Jesus talked about it when he said, when you pray, go to your closet and pray. Don't pray where people can see you. And he said, when you give alms, do it in secret. Don't give alms where people can see you. He said, do all of this stuff privately and quietly and in secret. And the reason for that is so that one reason for that is so that we're not doing that to be seen, which means that we're in our ego, which means that it's a barrier to truth, to attainment, to spiritual consciousness. Especially with new truths that we've heard that we may not have deeply realized yet, taking those truths out and sharing them with people who are not ready to hear them will invariably result in a backlash from them to you, poo-pooing it or telling you that it's not true and making you doubt it, and you may well lose that truth that you've just heard that you're working. You may have had a truth revealed to you inside, but it's brand new, and you take it out there to people who can't hear it, and the immediate rejection is that they will deny anything they can't understand, and you can lose that truth. And you may not have it again this lifetime. It may be gone. So it's very important to take truths that we're working with, or truths that we've just heard, or new truths, or new understandings, as well as our spiritual practices. Take all these things and keep it very quiet and keep it within us. And see, as the truth deepens and becomes a truth that you truly have realized and that you own, it will become part of your belief, and mind will express it for you, and it will be manifest in your life. And see, now it's manifest in your life, and people will come up to you and say, how come all this neat stuff is happening to you? And see, at that point you're demonstrating it, you're manifesting it, and at that point it's yours, and at that point you can tell them, if they're serious students, serious seekers, you can tell them what it is you're doing that results in this manifestation. So it will become revealed on its own when it's yours to the extent that mind manifests it in your experience. And until that happens, it's not yours yet. You're not believing it. If you're not manifesting it, if you're not demonstrating it, it's not yet yours, and it's still available to be lost. as people talk you out of it and beat you out of it. So work quietly within yourself. It's reasonable, if you feel led to share revelations that you might have had with your teacher, who perhaps can add a little more insight to it and deepen it for you and such like. But it's certainly not necessary to share it with your teacher either. If you're led not to, then don't. Trust yourself. But secrecy is a very important principle. Let me just look at this question and see if it wants to be answered tonight. Oh, it's exactly what we've been talking about tonight. What can an individual do to have more of the one consciousness come in and create rather than the little I consciousness creating? And that's exactly what we're talking about tonight. Tear down all those barriers, empty those lists, meditate, study, listen, pray, in the sense of being silent. Commune. The next stage after being silent and listening is that you will feel the presence, and you will be in the state that Joel calls communion, and that's a good state. And when you're listening, it's you listening. But what will happen if you do that is that you will feel the presence. You will feel the descent on you, or whatever it feels like to you, but you will definitely feel a presence, and you will know that that's what it is. And now you're in a state of communion. And once you're in the state of communion, you don't need anybody to teach you anything anymore, because you are now talking to yourself, capital S, whose sole interest is to answer your next question, to give you the next revelation, to take you the next step down the path. So once you've attained communion, it will unfold all by itself in the way it's supposed to unfold for you, and everything will begin to be taken care of. And we'll talk more about that maybe next class. So let's get quiet for a second, and then let's ask Dulcie to give us a demonstration of the awareness exercise. And I might add that there are tapes of this that you can get if you want to do some work with this practice, because it is a hot shortcut to the silence. Listening.
Before we go into it, I wanted to just preface with the information that goes right along from the 11th step in our 12 and 12 that says that there that we were catapulted into the fourth dimension. Bill talks about that, and that there is something called the sixth sense that's mentioned in there, which means it's a sense beyond the five physical senses of seeing, tasting, touching, hearing. And what Barbara discovered and helped so much with was the fact that there is a faculty that you meditate with that is not the mind, and it is not any of the five physical senses. And until you develop that, and she called it a muscle, and once I understood that it was a muscle that needed to be strengthened and expanded and increased, I didn't realize I was always trying to meditate with the wrong faculty, usually the mind. And it's absolutely, she said, she likened it to picking up a hammer to saw a piece of wood, that you have the wrong tool. And I became very interested because I was on film sets hours at a time, and I was trying to meditate there, and I didn't have, once she taught me this, I can drop into the silence just almost by snapping my fingers. Once she taught me this and showed me how to use the right faculty, so it could quiet in my life. show you how to find it and show you how to show others how to find it. Call this faculty the awareness faculty, for lack of better words. That's the thing Barbara called it, the awareness faculty. She says, here, be aware. Now this is just an experiment to show you how to pick it up and lay it down. Be aware of your left knee. Be aware of that left knee. And increase the awareness. And now you're not thinking about the left knee. You're not smelling it, tasting it, touching it, seeing it. You're being consciously aware of the existence of that left knee. And expand, increase that awareness, like stretching. Some experience the knee getting larger, or the sense of it. Just be aware of the left knee. Now be aware of the top of your head, the area at the top of your head. Consciously aware of the top of your head. Increase that awareness. Now I ask you, what happened to your left knee? Where did it go? By doing this, we can see how we can move it around at will. It's the proper use of will. Picking up the awareness exercise. And it is that faculty that we use to be aware of the knee, be aware of the top of the head, that we then become aware, be aware of I, the big I, presence, be aware right here, right now, moment by moment, presence of I am increase the awareness of I. Expand. Increasing that awareness of I. I has no pictures. You cannot conjure up any thought about it. Just I am. Presence. Now be aware of the silence behind the I. dropping into the silence behind I. Increase your awareness of that silence more than you ever have. Stretch, expand. Silence behind all, under all. Catch it. And in that womb, that vacuum, words can be said, but it doesn't touch that silence. Increase your awareness of the silence. Remember, it is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of self. Little self lays down. And we bask in that presence. Lay it all down and we rest. No effort. Just allow. Just allow. From there, there's no need, there's no top of the head. It's just all one. There's just no separation from anything. For it is I. It truly thunders. That silence thunders. It becomes so extremely energized, starts to get uncomfortable in the body. Secret is to open a valve and allow it to pour. Don't try to contain it yourself, but let it go out, out, out. This is world work. Silence pours through us out, as us, out, encompassing the area, the neighborhood, and it wraps itself around the entire globe. With divine love. Just busy. Just being. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Love you all.
Thank you.